Imagine being so convinced something is good for you that you drink it by the bottle, rub it on your face, and literally paint your teeth with it for fun. Now imagine that thing is radioactive enough to melt your bones from the inside out. Welcome to the 1920s, where the miracle cure was basically a slow-motion horror movie in a fancy bottle. Here's what you need to know. Radium glows in the dark, kills cancer cells, and was discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898. What America heard was glows and miracle and completely missed the part about will absolutely destroy you. It's like hearing sharks are amazing predators and deciding to use one as a bathtub toy. Within a few decades, radium went from scientific curiosity to the most hyped ingredient since someone discovered you could ferment grapes. Companies slapped radium on everything like it was going out of style. Spoiler alert, it eventually did, but only after enough people literally fell apart to make the connection. The human capacity for denial is truly breathtaking. The whole craze started innocently enough. Doctors discovered that radium could actually kill cancer cells, which was genuinely revolutionary. But then the marketing geniuses of America looked at this cancer-fighting radioactive element and thought, you know what? Let's put this in literally everything. It's the equivalent of discovering antibiotics work and immediately adding them to breakfast cereal. By the 1920s, you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting a radium product. Radioactive water, cosmetics, toothpaste, suppositories, and even a contraption designed to irradiate your reproductive organs. Because nothing says romance like bathing your private parts in radioactive steam. The company called it the Radiant Darkrinator, which sounds less like a medical device and more like a villain from a bad science fiction movie. The star of this radioactive circus was a drink called Radithor. Picture this, distilled water with radium dissolved in it, sold in tiny bottles for about $1 each. That's roughly $19 in today's money for radioactive tap water. The label proudly announced it was certified radioactive water, as if that was a selling point, which, horrifyingly, it absolutely was. The man behind Radithor was William Bailey, a Harvard dropout who called himself Dr. Bailey, despite having zero medical credentials. He claimed his magical glowing water could cure over 150 different ailments. Acne, Radithor, arthritis, Radithor, alcoholism, more Radithor. The man had the medical expertise of a fortune cookie and the marketing instincts of a con artist, which, to be fair, he literally was. And Bailey sold approximately 400,000 bottles between 1924 and 1930. He made millions while doctors who actually prescribed this poison got a 17% kickback. It was a pyramid scheme where the product was death in a bottle and everyone was getting rich. The American dream, but make it radioactive and fatal. The truly wild part, people genuinely believed this stuff worked. They drink it and feel energized, which makes sense because radiation does stimulate your cells. Unfortunately, it stimulates them the way a sledgehammer stimulates a piñata. You get a temporary boost right before everything catastrophically falls apart. But hey, they felt great for a while, so who's to judge their choices? Besides their surviving relatives, obviously. Enter Eben Byers, a wealthy Pittsburgh industrialist and amateur golf champion who made Radithor his entire personality. In 1927, Byers fell from his train berth and hurt his arm. A doctor suggested Radithor for the pain, and Byers took to it like a fish to radioactive water. He started drinking 3 bottles a day. The recommended dose was 1. Byers loved the stuff so much he gave it to his friends, his employees, and even his racehorses. Imagine being a horse and your owner decides your performance needs radioactive enhancement. The horses probably had opinions about this, but nobody asked them. Byers was convinced Radithor gave him a toned-up feeling, which is technically true if you consider bone dissolution a form of toning. Over the next few years, Byers consumed somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 bottles of Radithor. That's roughly 1,400 doses of concentrated radium going directly into his body. His skeleton was basically marinating in radioactive material. The human body mistakes radium for calcium and incorporates it directly into your bones, where it sits there emitting radiation like a tiny nuclear reactor in your skeleton. By 1930, Byers noticed the toned-up feeling had been replaced by a everything is falling apart feeling. His teeth started dropping out of his mouth like autumn leaves. He lost weight rapidly and developed constant headaches. When the Federal Trade Commission asked him to testify about Radithor in 1931, he was too sick to travel. They sent a lawyer to his house instead. The lawyer's report is the stuff of nightmares. Byers could barely speak. His entire upper jaw except for 2 front teeth had been surgically removed. Most of his lower jaw was gone too. Holes were literally forming in his skull as the radiation ate through his bone tissue from the inside. All the remaining bone in his body was slowly disintegrating. He looked like a living anatomy lesson on what not to do. Byers died on March 31, 1932 at age 51. An autopsy revealed his bones contained more than 3 times the amount of radium considered fatal. When his body was exhumed in 1965 for scientific study, his remains measured 225,000 becquerels of radioactivity. For context, a typical human body produces about 4,000 becquerels. Byers was still radioactive enough to be dangerous 33 years after death. They buried him in a lead-lined coffin to contain the radiation his corpse was still emitting. Think about that. The man was so radioactive that even in death, he needed special containment. He'd literally become a hazardous waste disposal problem. The Wall Street Journal later ran an article about him with the perfect headline: "The radium water worked fine until his jaw came off." But Byers wasn't alone in his radioactive nightmare. While rich people were drinking radium for fun, working-class women were being systematically poisoned by their employers. Enter the Radium Girls, factory workers who painted glow-in-the-dark numbers on watch dials and instrument panels. The watches were hugely popular, especially after World War I, when soldiers discovered they were perfect for coordinating attacks in dark trenches. The factories hired young women, some as young as 15, to paint these tiny numbers with radium-laced paint. The going rate was about $1.50 per dial, and a fast worker could paint around 250 in a day. The job was considered prestigious because you got to work in a clean factory instead of a sweatshop or doing manual labor. Here's where it gets properly horrifying. The brushes would lose their fine points after a few strokes, so supervisors instructed the workers to use their lips and tongues to reshape the bristles. Lip, dip, paint. Lip, dip, paint. All day long. They were told the paint was completely harmless and might even be good for their health. Some sources claim it was beautifying, which is an interesting way to describe slow radiation poisoning. The women glowed in the dark when they left work. They'd paint their nails, teeth, and faces with the stuff for parties, creating a ghoulish glow that everyone thought was hilarious and harmless. Their clothes, even their undergarments, would shimmer with radioactive dust. One report noted that every inch of the workers glowed, even the corsets. They were basically walking nightlights, completely unaware they were dying. Around 1921, the women started getting sick. Their teeth would ache and fall out, but the holes wouldn't heal. Instead, abscesses would form, spreading infection through their jaws. They developed severe anemia as their bone marrow died. Their bones became brittle and would fracture from minor impacts. Then came the jaw necrosis, where the bone tissue in their jaws would literally rot away while they were still alive. The medical community had a name for it. By 1924, radium jaw. The condition was excruciatingly painful and absolutely horrific to witness. One woman's entire lower jaw fell away from her skull before she died. Another had such extensive damage that doctors had to remove what remained of her jaw entirely. These were teenagers and women in their 20s experiencing something that looked like a medieval curse. The companies denied everything with a kind of shamelessness that would make a modern corporation blush. They claimed the women were dying of other causes. The U.S. Radium Corporation actually blamed syphilis, attempting to destroy the women's reputations along with their bodies. They hired doctors to examine the workers and issue fake reports claiming everyone was perfectly healthy. One company doctor's report was literally forged to hide the evidence. Meanwhile, the executives and scientists at these companies knew radium was dangerous. They protected themselves with lead shields and special equipment while telling the workers it was safe to lick radioactive paint off brushes. The level of callous disregard for human life would be shocking if corporate malfeasance wasn't so boringly predictable. They knew, they lied, and women died. Tale as old as industrial capitalism. By 1924, 50 women who had worked at the New Jersey plant were sick, and a dozen had died. It took until 1927 for 5 women to find a lawyer willing to sue U.S. Radium Corporation. By their first court appearance in January 1928, 2 women were bedridden and none could raise their arms to take the oath. They were literally dying in the courtroom while fighting for justice. The case dragged on with the kind of legal maneuvering that makes you understand why people hate lawyers. The company argued that a 2-year statute of limitations meant the women's claims were invalid. Never mind that radium poisoning takes years to manifest. Never mind that the women were told the material was safe. The law said 2 years, and the law was apparently written by people who'd never encountered corporate negligence on an industrial scale. The women became known as the Radium Girls, and their story finally broke into national consciousness. Newspapers covered their deteriorating health and their fight against the corporations that poisoned them. Public sympathy swung heavily in their favor, probably because watching young women die horrible deaths while a company denies responsibility tends to upset people. It's one of humanity's few remaining redeeming qualities. Now, in 1928, the women won a settlement, though several didn't live to see their compensation. The case established that workers could sue their employers for occupational diseases, which was apparently a revolutionary concept at the time. It also led to improved labor safety standards, though it's depressing that it took multiple gruesome deaths to achieve basic workplace safety. Progress, but make it tragic. The radium craze wasn't limited to drinks and deadly factory work. The cosmetics industry decided that faces needed radium too. In 1933, a French company called Tho-Radia launched a line of beauty products containing both radium bromide and thorium chloride. The name literally combines the two radioactive elements they were slathering on people's faces. Subtlety was not their strong suit. Tho-Radia sold cream, powder, soap, toothpaste, and even lipstick in 12 different colors. Their advertising featured a glowing woman whose face was literally illuminated by radioactive beauty products. The tagline was, "Radium in the service of beauty," which sounds less like a marketing campaign and more like a threat. They claimed their products would eliminate fat, prevent wrinkles, cure pimples, and basically reverse aging through the power of radiation. The man behind Tho-Radia was pharmacist Alexis Musali, who partnered with a doctor named Alfred Curie. No relation to Marie and Pierre Curie, but the name similarity was absolutely intentional. They were banking on people making the association between their random doctor named Curie and the actual Nobel Prize-winning scientists. Marie Curie's family considered legal action over the obvious name exploitation, but apparently decided it wasn't worth the hassle. The products actually did contain small amounts of radium and thorium. Lab tests from 1932 confirmed it. Not enough to immediately kill you, but definitely enough to increase your long-term cancer risk. The idea was that tiny amounts of radiation would stimulate your cells and give you that healthy glow, which they did, technically, right before potentially giving you cancer. But your skin looked great briefly, so was it really that bad? Yes it was. Tho-Radia sold throughout France and parts of Europe for years. The products weren't cheap either. Cream cost 15 francs per pot, which was a significant sum for the average person. People were literally paying premium prices to rub radioactive materials on their faces. The power of good marketing combined with scientific illiteracy created some truly spectacular disaster. By 1937, the French government finally woke up and classified radium and thorium as poisons. Tho-Radia had to remove the radioactive ingredients from their products, though they kept the name and continued selling into the 1960s. At that point, they were just regular cosmetics trading on decades of radioactive brand recognition. It's like if Marlboro stopped putting tobacco in cigarettes but kept selling them as Marlboro health sticks. The whole radium fad finally collapsed under the weight of all those corpses. Eben Byers' death made national headlines. The Radium Girls lawsuit became famous. Doctors who weren't being paid by radium companies started publishing research showing that ingesting radium was, shockingly, extremely bad for you. Information that had been known since at least 1913 but was thoroughly ignored during the profit-making years. In 1938, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act finally gave regulators the power to crack down on radioactive products. Companies could no longer market radium as a health product. Bailey Radium Laboratories, maker of Radithor, was shut down. William Bailey himself died in 1949 of bladder cancer. When his body was exhumed in 1970, it was still radioactive. Even the snake oil salesman got bitten by his own snake. The story of the radium craze is a perfect storm of corporate greed, scientific ignorance, regulatory failure, and human gullibility. Companies knew their products were dangerous but sold them anyway. Regulators either didn't care or lacked the authority to intervene. Consumers trusted marketing over science, and dozens, possibly hundreds of people died horrible deaths as a result, all for products that promised eternal youth and vigor but delivered bone cancer and jaw necrosis. The craziest part? Most of the radium products didn't even work. Many cosmetics and tonics claiming to contain radium actually had none in them at all. The manufacturers couldn't afford the real thing, so they just lied about it. People were paying premium prices for fake radioactive products. Imagine dying because you bought the genuine article when you could have been ripped off by the knockoff version and lived. That's a special kind of tragic irony. Even the products that did contain radium wouldn't have done what they claimed. Radium doesn't cure arthritis or reverse aging or boost your energy except in the way that destroying your bone marrow technically changes your body's energy distribution. The entire phenomenon was built on lies, pseudoscience, and the kind of optimistic thinking that kills people. The 1920s, an era so convinced of progress that it drank radioactive water and called it healthcare. Today, we look back at the radium craze with appropriate horror and a slight sense of superiority. How could people be so stupid, we ask, while buying supplements that do nothing and believing influencers who recommend drinking celery juice for chronic illness? Humans haven't gotten smarter, we've just changed which nonsense we believe in. Give it 100 years and people will look at our health trends with the same baffled disgust. The legacy of the radium craze lives on in improved workplace safety laws, stronger pharmaceutical regulations, and the general understanding that just because something glows doesn't mean you should rub it on your face. It took countless deaths and unimaginable suffering to learn lessons that seem obvious in hindsight. That's humanity in a nutshell, learning the hard way and hoping future generations pay attention. Radium is still used today, but only in controlled medical settings and with extensive safety precautions. We understand now that radiation is a tool, not a miracle. It can kill cancer cells when carefully targeted, but it'll kill everything else if you're not careful. The difference between medicine and poison really is just the dose and the application. The 1920s just decided to skip the careful part and go straight to mass poisoning. So the next time someone tries to sell you a miracle cure or a revolutionary health product, remember the people who drank radioactive water until their jaws fell off. Remember the Radium Girls who glowed in the dark before they died in agony. Remember that corporations will absolutely kill you for profit if given the chance. It's not cynicism, it's just history with a body count. The radium craze ended nearly a century ago, but Eben Byers is still radioactive in his lead-lined coffin in Pittsburgh, a permanent reminder that sometimes the glow-up is literal and the